Bing bongy bong, bing bongy bong. This is Joe, the bearded historian. He'll tell you an interesting story. Be careful of his soldiers, they can be brats. This is Angel, she's an entity. She'll cause chaos and plant her hands at you. This is Sue, she likes spirits, not the alcohol. She's the reason this channel exists. This is David, he likes fire trucks. He's here occasionally. Bing bongy bong, bing bongy bong, bing bongy bong. We preserve his story. Welcome to Wayback Wednesday. We are going to be doing a race. I have selected a random race today. For reasons. What reasons? I don't know. Here we go with our shout out. Shout out time. Here's a shout out just for you. You support me, so I'll support you. This shout out is for our friend. I forgot to set it. Alright, so we've got some machinery. Alright, here goes the machinery race. Everybody, here we go. Oh, maybe. There it goes. Okay. I see Moon, I see Xantham, I see Sands, Exploit, 40, Katina, Journey, Melinda, Squirrel, Glovers, Pedroza, there's Freckled, there's VR, Melinda's currently taking the lead. I see Redhead, trying to sneak up. There's Popcorn and Afromax and Tessa. Oh, everybody's falling back. Squirrel's currently in the lead. No, VR is now. Here's comes Pedroza. Oh, Comics is coming from the lead, which I need to update. Apparently he didn't take it off there, even though I told it to. There's Visiting. Dave's Camping. Oh, wow, it was close. Who won? Looks like Sandy might have won. Let's go with Sandy. Okay, it says, sharing Sandy and life. Great description. Mostly, it is about puppy dog. Very cute puppy dog. And her owner. So if you like doggos, check out Sandy's Lady, or Sandy Lady, excuse me. Like, share, comment. Have a good day. All right, Mr. Bun, what you can tell us?
Well, a couple days late, but, better late than never. May 8th, with my wife's discovering, was the birth date of one of our presidents, Harry S. Truman. Now, Harry S. Truman had a couple things that he is more pronounced known for, besides being the first and only president to authorize the use of a nuclear weapon, when he basically was blessed with that task of handling what was basically outlined by his predecessor, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. But he also had led a rather interesting life, both in the career of politics, military, and he came from kind of a humble upbringing in Missouri. Interestingly enough, the S in his name is not an abbreviation.
I think I remember learning that.
Yeah,
it was like the only person, one of the few people who had just a letter.
Yeah, and it was because it was kind of a nod to both of his grandfathers, Anderson Ship Truman and Solomon Young. Semi-common practice. I do remember a funny story about that, because a student was writing a essay on Harry S. Truman and didn't put a dot after the S, and the teacher docked him points for it. And so he told the teacher, well, he doesn't have a dot behind it. He says, but it's common practice to put the abbreviation. This student was smart enough to go and contact Harry S. Truman after he had, left office, and he got a letter back saying, it's fine with or without the dot. Give him his points.
Well, at that point, I think the dot would make you think it was something else. And so I would have left that off too, because
Yeah.
it's not an abbreviation.
No. So it works either way. But as it was, ancestry, he was primarily English with some Scott, Irish, German, and French. His family was a farmer and livestock dealer. They lived in a little town called Lamar until Harry was about 10 months old, and then they moved to a farm near Harrisonville, Missouri. As he, would go through school, he'd become interested in music, reading, history, encouraged by his mom. And he also would find himself getting pulled into things for political and personal advice from his mother. He learned to play the piano at age 7, and he'd get up at 5 o'clock every morning to practice the piano, which was more than twice a week until he was 15, becoming quite skilled of a player. And then at the age of 15, he started working as a page for the Democratic National Convention in Kansas City in 1900. His father had many friends who were active in the Democratic Party, which helped the young Harry gain his first political position. Well, he graduated from Independence High School in 1901, took classes at the Spalding Commercial College, a Kansas City business school, and studied bookkeeping, shorthand, typing, but stopped after a year. He employed briefly at the mailroom for the Kansas City Star before making use of his business college experience to obtain a job as a timekeeper for the construction crews at the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Railway, which required him to sleep in the workmen's camps along the rail lines. Truman and his brother Vivian later worked as clerks at the National Bank of Commerce in Kansas City. In 1906, he returned to the Grandview farm, where he lived until he entered the Army in 1917. Well, during that period, he courted Bess Wallace. He proposed in 1911, but she turned him down. Truman later said that he intended to propose again, but he wanted to have a better income than he earned as a farmer. To that end, during the years on the farm and immediately after World War I, he became active in several business ventures. This included a lead and zinc mine near Commerce, Oklahoma, a company that bought land and leased the oil drilling rights to prospectors, and then speculation in the Kansas City real estate. Truman occasionally derived some income from these enterprises, but none proved successful in the long term. Now, Truman is the only president since William McKinley, elected in 1896, who did not receive a college degree. He, in addition to having briefly attended the business college, from 1923 to 1925, he took night courses toward an LLB at the Kansas City Law School, now the University of Missouri / Kansas City School of Law, but dropped out after losing re-election as a county judge. He was informed by attorneys in the Kansas City area that his education and experience were probably sufficient to receive a license to practice law, but did not pursue it because he won election as a presiding judge. Well, while serving as president in 1947, Truman applied for a law license. A friend who was an attorney began working out the arrangements and informed Truman that his application had to be notarized. By the time Truman received this information, he had changed his mind and never followed it up. Interestingly enough, the discovery of Truman's application in 1996, the Missouri Supreme Court issued a posthumous honorary law license to the fellow. Now, due to lack of his funds for college, Truman considered attending the United States Military Academy at West Point, which had no tuition, but refused his appointment because poor eyesight. He was enlisted in the Missouri National Guard in 1905. Yeah, we could do the National Guard, let you shoot at people that way. 1905, served until 1911 at the Kansas City-based Battery B, 2nd Missouri Field Artillery Regiment, in which he attained the rank of corporal. At his induction, his eyesight without glasses was an unacceptable 20/50 in his right eye and 2400 in left.
Ouch.
Past the standard legal blindness. The second time he took the test, he passed by secretly memorizing the eye chart.
Well, that's one way to do it.
Okay. He was described as 5 feet, 10 inches tall, gray-eyed, dark-haired, and a light complexion. Well, when the United States entered World War I on April 6, 1917, Trump rejoined Battery B, successfully recruiting new soldiers for the expanding unit for which he was elected as their first lieutenant. Before deployment to France, Truman was sent to training at Fort Doniphan, Fort Sill near Lawton, Oklahoma, and when the regiment was federalized as the 129th Field Artillery. The regimental commander during its training was Robert M. Danford, who later served as the Army's Chief of Field Artillery. Truman recalled that he learned more practical useful information from Danforth in 6 weeks than from 6 months of formal Army instruction, and when Truman served as an artillery instructor, he consciously patterned his approach on Danforth. Now, Truman also ran the camp canteen with Edward Jacobson, a clothing store clerk he knew from Kansas City. Unlike most canteens funded by unit members, which usually lost money, the canteen operated by Truman and Jacobson turned a profit, returning each soldier's initial $2 investment and $10,000 in dividends in 6 months. At Fort Sill, Trump met Lieutenant James M. Pendergast, nephew of Tom Pendergast, the Kansas City political boss, a connection that had a profound influence later in Truman's life. Make note on that. Mid-1918, about 1 million soldiers from the American Expeditionary Force were in France, and Truman then was promoted to captain, effective on April 23rd, and in July became commander of the newly arrived Battery D, 129th Field Artillery, 35th Division. Battery D was known for its discipline problems, and Truman was initially unpopular because of his efforts to restore order. Despite attempts by the men to intimidate him into quitting, Truman succeeded in making his corporals and sergeants accountable for discipline. He promised to back them up if they performed capably, and reduced them to private if they did not. In the event memorialized in the battery lore of the Battle of Who Run, the soldiers began to flee during the sudden night attack by the Germans in the Vosges Mountains. Truman succeeded by ordering his men to stay and fight, using profanity from his railroad days.
Woohoo!
The men were so surprised to hear Truman use such language they immediately obeyed. He's gonna hurt my feelings. Truman's unit joined a massive pre-arranged assault barrage on September 26, 1918, at the opening of the Meuse-Argonne offensive. They advanced with difficulty over pitted terrain to follow the infantry and set up an observation post west of Chepping. On September 27th, Truman saw through his binoculars an enemy position artillery battery deploying across the river, a position which allowed them to fire upon the neighboring 28th Division. Truman's orders limited him to targets facing the 35th Division, but he ignored this and then patiently waited until the Germans had walked their horses well away from their guns, ensuring they could not relocate out of range of Truman's battery. He then ordered his men to open fire, and their attack destroyed the enemy battery. His actions were credited with saving the lives of the 28th Division soldiers who otherwise would have come under fire from the Germans. Truman was given a dressing down by the regimental commander, Colonel Carl D. Clem, who threatened to convene a court-martial, but Clem never followed through and Truman was never punished. Among other actions during the Meuse-Argonne offensive, Truman's battery provided fire support for George S. Patton's tank brigade and fired some of the last shots of the war on November 11, 1918. Battery D did not lose any men while under Truman's command in France. To show appreciation for his leadership, his men presented him with a large loving cup upon their return to the United States after the war. Now, the war was a transformative experience in which Truman manifested his leadership qualities. He had entered the service in 1917 as a family farmer who had worked in clerical jobs that did not require the ability to motivate or direct others. But during the war, he gained leadership experience and a record of success that greatly enhanced and supported his post-war political career in Missouri. Truman was brought up in the Presbyterian and Baptist churches, but avoided revivals and sometimes ridiculed revivalist preachers. He rarely spoke about religion, which to him primarily meant ethical behavior among traditional Protestant lines. Truman once wrote in a letter to his future wife Bess, "You know the thing, I know nothing about Lent and such things. Most of the soldiers he commanded in the war were Catholics, and one of his closest friends was 129th Field Artillery's chaplain, Monsignor L. Chris Truman. The two remained friends until Truman's death in 1960. Developing leadership and interpersonal skills later made him a successful politician and helped Truman get along with his Catholic soldiers as well he did with soldiers of other Christian denominations and the unit's Jewish members. Now, he was honorably discharged from the Army as a captain in May 6, 1919, and by 1920 he was appointed a major in the Officers Reserves Corps. He became a lieutenant colonel in 1925 and colonel in 1932. In the 1920s and 1930s, he commanded the 1st Battalion, 179th Field Artillery, 122nd Infantry Division. After being promoted to colonel, Truman advanced to the command of the same regiment. Now, after his election to the U.S. Senate, Truman was transferred to the General Assignment Group, a holding unit for less active officers. Although he had not been consulted in advance, Truman protested his reassignment, which led to his resumption in regimental command, and he remained an active reservist until the early 1940s. Truman had volunteered for active military service during World War II, but was not accepted, partially because of age, and partially because President Franklin Delano Roosevelt desired senators and congressmen who belonged to the military reserves to support the war effort by remaining in Congress or by ending their active duty service and resuming their congressional seats. He was an active reservist from the early 1940s until retiring as a colonel in the then redesignated U.S. Army Reserve, January 20, 1953. Now, for his service, he was awarded the World War I Victory Medal with 2 battle clasps for Saint-Mihiel and Meuse-Argonne and a defensive sector clasp. He also was the recipient of 2 Armed Force Reserve medals. Now, politics, as we were mentioning earlier, he did have some experience coming back from World War I. He did get married in 1919 to his wife, Bess Wallace. The couple had 1 child, Mary Margaret Truman. Now, shortly before the wedding, Truman and Jacobson, the guy from the canteen, opened a haberdashery.
Haberdashery.
I love that word. Together at 104th West 12th Street in downtown Kansas City. After a brief initial success, the store went bankrupt during the recession of 1921. Truman did not pay off the last of the debts from the venture until 1935, when he did so with the aid of banker William T. Kemper, who worked behind the scenes to enable Trump's brother, Vivian, to buy Trump's $5,600 promissory note during the asset sale of a bank that had failed in the Great Depression. The note had risen and fallen in value as it was bought and sold, interest accumulated, and Trump made payments. So
you keep saying Trump.
I know. It's that T. Truman made payments, so by the time the last bank hold had failed, it was worth nearly $9,000. Thanks to Kemper's efforts. It
doesn't help that the first 3 letters of both names are the same.
Yeah, Truman. Vivian was able to buy it for only $1,000. It's a pretty good trade-off. Jacobson and Truman remained close friends even after the store failed, and Jacobson's advice to Truman on Zionism later played a role in the U.S. government's decision to recognize Israel. With the help of the Kansas City Democratic machine led by Tom Pendergrast, Truman was elected in 1922 as the county court judge of Jackson County's Eastern District. Jackson County's 3-judge court included judges from the Western District in Kansas City, the Eastern District, the county outside of Kansas City, and a presiding judge elected county-wide. This was a similar administrative rather than judicial court, similar to the county commissions in many other jurisdictions. Now, Truman lost the 1924 re-election campaign by a Republican wave led by President Calvin Coolidge's landslide election to a full term. 2 years of selling automobile club memberships convinced him that a public service career was safer for a family man approaching middle age, and he planned a run for presiding judge in 1926. Well, Truman won the job in 1926 with the support of the Pendergrast machine, and he was re-elected in 1930. Well, as presiding judge, Truman helped coordinate the 10-year plan, which was a transformation of Jackson County and the Kansas City skyline with new public works projects, including an extensive series of roads and construction of a new white and white designed county court building. Also in 1926, he became president of the National Old Trails Road Association, and during his term he saw a dedication of 12 Madonna of the Trail monuments to honor pioneer women.
I just like that.
Yeah. By 1933, Truman was named the Missouri Director of the Federal Reemployment Program, part of the Civil Works Administration, at the request of Postmaster General James Farley. This was payback to Pendergast for delivering the Kansas City vote to Franklin Delano Roosevelt in the 1932 presidential election. The appointment conferred Pendergast's control over federal patronage jobs in Missouri and marked the zenith of his power. It also created a relationship between Truman and Roosevelt's aide, Harry Hopkins, that assured Truman avid support for the New Deal. Well, after serving as a county judge, Truman wanted to run for governor of Congress, but Pendergast rejected these ideas. Truman thought he might serve out his career as some well-paying county censor. Circumstances changed when Pendergast reluctantly backed him as the machine's choice for the 1934 Democratic Party election. Pendergast's first four choices had declined to run. In the primary, Truman defeated Congressman John J. Cochran and Jacob L. Milligan with solid support from Jackson County, which was crucial to his candidacy. Also critical were the contacts he had made statewide in his capacity as a county official, member of the Freemasons, military reservist, and member of the American Legion. In the general election, he defeated the incumbent Republican Roscoe C. Patterson by nearly 20 percentage points in a continuing wave of New Deal Democrats elected during the Great Depression. Easy to remember that this is the same time that everything was going, Black Friday had happened, the Great Depression was starting, people were, winding up without a job, and so the New Deal was designed basically to help get people back to work. Now, Truman assumed office with a reputation as the senator from Pendergast. He referred patronage decisions to Pendergast, but maintained he voted with his own conscience. He later defended his patronage decisions by saying, by offering a little to the machine, he saved a lot. In his first term, Truman spoke out against corporate greed and the dangers of Wall Street speculators and other moneyed special interests attaining too much influence in the national affairs. Though he served on the high-profile appropriations and interstate commerce committees, he was largely ignored by President Roosevelt and had trouble getting calls returned from the White House.
What?
During the U.S. Senate election in 1940, the U.S. Attorney Maurice Milligan, former opponent Jacob Milligan's brother, and former Governor Lloyd Stark both challenged Truman in the Democratic primary. Truman was officially weakened by Pendergast's imprisonment for tax evasion the previous year. The senator had remained loyal, having claimed that the Republican judges, not the Roosevelt administration, were responsible for his boss's downfall. St. Louis Party leader Robert E. Hannigan's support of Truman proved critical. He later broke over a deal that put Truman on the national ticket. In the end, Stark and Milligan split the anti-Pendergast vote in the Senate Democratic primary, and Truman won by a total of 8,000 votes. In the November election, Truman would defeat a Republican, Manville H. Davis, by a 51 to 49%.
Wow.
That's a tight race. As senator, Truman opposed both Nazi Germany and Communist Russia. Now, interesting item. 2 days after Hitler invaded the Soviet Union in June of 1941, he said, if we see that Germany is winning, we ought to help Russia, and if Russia is winning, we ought to help Germany.
Well, that's stupid.
Yeah, and that way we let them kill as many as possible, although I don't want to see Hitler's victory under any circumstances.
That's the stupidest idea yet.
Yeah. Now, this quote, without that last part, later became a staple in Soviet and later Russian propaganda as evidence of an American conspiracy to destroy the country.
I can see why.
Yeah. Now, 1940 came along. Truman traveled to various military bases. The waste and profiteering he saw led him to use his chairmanship of the Committee on Military Affairs Subcommittee on War Mobilization, that's a heck of a long title, to start investigations into abuses where the nation prepared for war. A new special committee was set up under Truman to conduct a formal investigation. The White House supported the plan rather than weather a more hostile probe by the House of Representatives. The main mission of the committee was to expose and fight waste and corruption in the gigantic government wartime contracts. Now, Truman's initiative convinced Senate leaders of the necessity for the committee, which reflected his demands for honest and effective administration and his distrust of big business and Wall Street. Truman managed the committee with extraordinary skill and usually achieved consensus, generating heavy media publicity that gave him a national reputation. Activities of the Truman Committee ranged from the criticizing of the $1-a-year men hired by the government, many of whom proved ineffective, to investigating a shoddily built New Jersey housing project for war workers. Now, in March of 1944, Truman attempted to probe a certain project. He was talked out of this action by the Secretary of War, Henry L. Simpson. Do you know what the project was? The Manhattan Project.
I was trying to think of what projects is like.
Yeah. Now, with his work, he did save as much as $15 billion, equivalent to $230 billion in our money today. These activities put Truman on the cover of Time magazine, according to the Senate Historical Minutes. Leading the committee, Truman erased his earlier public image as an errand runner for Kansas City politicos, and no senator ever gained more political benefits from chasing a special investigating committee than Missouri's Harry S. Truman. Now, with all the details going on, World War II is going on at this time, a lot of the people behind FDR had doubts that he would live out his fourth term as president. Harry Wallace, who was his vice president previously, was starting to, by some of his workers, was starting to veer a little bit too far left. And so they thought, well, let's put Truman on the package with Roosevelt for his fourth term. It worked out. FDR was elected for his fourth term. It was pretty much a landslide. The electoral vote was 432 to 99.
Ow.
Yeah, and interestingly enough, Truman was sworn in as vice president on January 20th, 1945. After the inauguration, Truman called his mother, who instructed him, "Now you behave yourself."
No.
But it was a brief vice presidency, relatively uneventful. Truman mostly presided over Senate and attended parties and receptions, kept most of the same office from his Senate years, only using the vice president official office in the Capitol to greet visitors. He only had one case where he had to make a tie-breaking decision on April 10th. But crazy enough, the thing that he basically got a lot of his publicity for, 82 days. President Roosevelt died April 12th, 1945. Truman, who was presiding over the Senate as usual, had just adjourned the session for the day and was preparing to go have a drink with the House Speaker when he got an urgent message to head for the White House. He ran into Eleanor Roosevelt, who told him her husband had died of a massive cerebral hemorrhage. Truman asked her if there was anything he could do for her. She replied, "Is there anything I could do for you? For you are now the one in trouble."
Uh-oh. What did he do? No, just kidding.
He was sworn in as president at 7:09 in the West Wing of the White House by Chief Justice Harlan S. Stone. Now, the thing that is kind of interesting that I remember vividly in this case was that Truman, for the longest time, people would be put into the vice presidency with the thought, okay, he's in office, he'll be happy, he'll stay out of trouble.
Yeah.
This worked to a degree until, certain people were basically elevated by the death of the president. Truman, to his credit, here he was, he'd served in the military, he'd been a judge, he, understood the ins and outs of the politics. All of a sudden, he had really big shoes to fill. Because, first of all, they were in the middle of the World War. Things were going well. He had no idea about the Manhattan Project, about the atomic bomb that was being designed. A lot of that he had to basically be thrown into in a short period of time. As it was, a lot of the people that he would work with, your generals, military plans on the global stage. England had just got done having Winston Churchill step down or get voted out. So they still had Stalin on the other side of the world with his, deeds. And so he was making a lot of the military decisions, trusting generals on how to operate in the military field. It says on the first full day, Truman told reporters, "Boys, if you ever pray for me now. I don't know if you fellas have ever had a load of hay fall on you, but they told me what happened yesterday. I felt like the moon, the stars, and all the planets had fallen on me." Now, he benefited from a honeymoon period with the success of defeating Nazi Germany, May 8th, so less than a month after taking presidency. Truman was told briefly on the afternoon of April 12th that they had a new highly destructive weapon.
Goodness.
It wasn't until April 25th that the Secretary of War, the same guy who talked him out of investigating the Manhattan Project, Henry Simpson, told him the details. He said, "We have discovered the most terrible bomb in the history of the world. It may be the fire destruction prophesied in the Euphrates Valley area after Noah and his fabulous ark." Harry Truman writing about the atomic bomb on his diary, July 25th, 1945. Now, Truman had made a journey for the Potsdam Conference with Stalin and British leader Winston Churchill. There was where he had learned about the Trinity test. The first atomic bomb on July 16th had been successful. He hinted to Stalin that he was about to use a new kind of weapon against the Japanese. Though this was the first time the Soviets had ever been officially given information about the bomb, Stalin apparently was already well aware about this bomb and having learned about it through atomic espionage long before Truman did. Our enemies knew about it before our president did. That's kind of scary.
That's very scary.
In August, the Japanese government refused to surrender demands as specifically outlined in the Potsdam Declaration, and with the invasion of Japan imminent, Truman approved the schedule of dropping the two available bombs. Now, Truman always said attacking Japan with atomic bombs saved many lives on both sides. I will have to agree with this, because I've actually seen what they had schematics and estimated we would have lost in soldiers, and it could take over a year, between 250 and 500,000 Allied casualties. We dropped the first one on the 6th, and Nagasaki got hit 3 days later. Now, interestingly enough, after Nagasaki got hit on the 9th, then the Soviet Union declared war on Japan and invaded Manchuria.
That makes sense.
Yeah. But, supporters of Truman's decision argued that with the tenacious Japanese defense of the outlying islands, the bombing saving hundreds of lives of Allied prisoners, Japanese civilians, and combatants on both sides, that it would have been a loss to the invasion of Japan. Critics argued that the use of nuclear weapons was unnecessary. It's an argument and debate that's going to be... One of these days we ought to put that in for a live debate. Give us both sides of the perspective, because, I'm sure there's still people to this day that think, we shouldn't have used it.
There's no way to know for sure.
No. Truman, in 1948, defended his decision to use the atomic bomb, stating, "As President of the United States, I had the fateful responsibility of deciding whether or not to use this weapon for the first time. It was the hardest decision I ever had to make. But the President cannot duck hard problems. He cannot pass the buck. I made the decision after discussions with the ablest men in our government, and after long and prayerful consideration, I decided the bomb should be used to end the war quickly and save countless lives, Japanese as well as Americans." Now, after World War II, basically the Cold War was already brewing, but things started to go, a lot faster after that. There was also issues on the home front, labor union strikes, economic issues. There was also basically the blockade over in Berlin. And Truman, to that effect, basically developed the Truman Doctrine, and he came up with the quite fun decision to save Berlin rather than just giving it over to the Soviet forces. He set up a way that the generals and the supply groups would be able to keep supplies going and keep Berlin free. And it really must have frustrated the Soviets. They're thinking, oh, we'll surround them and let them starve out. In fact, they even held up, signs saying, come and join us. We've got food. Well, surprisingly enough, nobody ever had to go over the wall, or I should say, go into Berlin on the east side. At that time, the wall wasn't even there yet. But as far as what they were able to do at that early stage of the Cold War, they saved a lot of German people from a fate worse than death living in Soviet East Berlin. Probably the one issue that wound up hurting Truman towards the end was when the Korean War happened, though. A lot of people were surprised that the North Koreans decided to invade South Korea, and us being an ally decided to step in and try to help Korea. One of our at that time, our older generals, MacArthur, would help spearhead several actions. And for a while there, it looked like we were about ready to end the Korean War by pushing past the original line and basically with invisible view of China. Mm. And then next thing we knew, all these Chinese armies came across the border.
Whoops.
Now, what became the big sticking point for a lot of people was that MacArthur, if MacArthur would have had the go-ahead, he would have gone ahead and probably used nuclear weapons to show China that we mean business. Truman fired him. Truman sent him home. And in a way, I think it probably was a good idea, because this is the same China that felt a nuclear war is winnable with acceptable losses. And granted, back then, nukes were a lot smaller. We lost a lot of men when China basically entered the war. And to this day, the Korean War still goes on. They had a ceasefire, but it's never been official. It's never been ended. But with that happening, a lot of people felt Truman lost a lot of his support. When Truman had his chance to run for office again in 1953, he declined. He basically had enough of politics and enough of the nitpicking. One thing that has always been kind of a fun thing is that the first time that Truman went up for election to be elected president in his own right, there was a picture, and I think it was the Chicago paper that had said Dewey beats Truman. And irony is that when he went to bed, that was going to be the headline. Well, during the night, the counts had came in, and Truman had actually won. And so there's this beautiful statue in our downtown row of presidents showing him holding up that paper.
I think that was in
Dewey beats Truman.
Was that in the first one?
I think so.
I want to say it was in the first one. We will be doing part 2 sometime.
Sometime, yeah.
When, we don't know yet.
Yeah. But as it was, Truman, decided to finish his run. He was succeeded by Ike, Dwight D. Eisenhower, who was a pretty good president in his own right as well. Republican, who basically would be the next president to work with the Cold War initiatives of the day. Sadly, Truman would go ahead and finish out, his presidency. He would take and end his days in office January 20th, 1953. And he lived until 1972 and passed away on December the 26th, the 33rd president of the nation.
Woo!
But folks, that was our little day in history for Harry S. Truman. If you guys have any politicals that you'd like us to take a peek at, we always are up for suggestions. This has been the Bearded Historian. This is Sue holding the camera.
Yeah.
Folks, have a good day.